views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Today, we are taking a look back at some of our favorite segments from 2021. This year has been filled with interviews ranging from Bronx politics to topics on nationwide debates. So please stick around. The best of Open BXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. A Texas law banning abortion after 6 weeks sparked nationwide conversation on reproductive rights and the decriminalization of abortion. Jacqueline Marrero of Planned Parenthood Greater New York joined me for a discussion to find out whether more women throughout the country are in danger of losing their reproductive freedom. Although the original story is rooted in Texas, the effects of this decision struck women across the country and possibly even the world. Jacqueline did a wonderful job explaining why this is something we should all care about. The U.S. is in the midst of a nationwide discussion on reproductive rights after new Texas law bans abortion after 6 weeks. Here to discuss what this means for women across the country and ways abortion can be decriminalized is Jacqueline Marrero of Planned Parenthood Greater New York. Jacqueline, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to begin, can you just start out by telling us, you're representing Planned Parenthood, what it is actually all about?
Sure. So first I'll start talking about Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. We are a healthcare provider, educator, and advocate who believes that every individual should have the resources, information, and power they need to make informed decisions about their own body, family, and future. We offer a wide range of sexual and reproductive health services, including STI testing and treatment, HIV prevention, wellness exams, transgender hormone therapy, pregnancy testing, birth control, and of course, safe legal abortion. As educators, we teach young folks and adults about sexual and reproductive health care and bodily autonomy. And as advocates, we fight for reproductive rights to ensure everyone, no matter their race, age, gender identity, immigration status, or even income, has equitable access to vital health care. What's happening in Texas right now is alarming. The state has enacted one of the most restrictive abortion bans we've seen in the past 50 years since the passage of Roe v. Wade. In the dead of the night, the Supreme Court turned its back on 50 years of precedent and allowed the state of Texas to enact a 6-week abortion ban. We know that 6 weeks is before many people even know that they're pregnant. Right now, we're hearing about patients in Texas desperate and frustrated with very little resources and nowhere to turn to access vital health care like abortion. I heard of a woman, and this story breaks my heart, who just found out that she's pregnant. It's an unwanted pregnancy, but right now she's quarantining. She tested positive for COVID, and that 14-day quarantine is going to put her past the 6-week limit. She doesn't know what to do, and that's the reality on the ground right now in Texas.
And then can you just tell us what the Department of Justice is doing to combat that?
The Department of Justice is taking action against the state to ensure that folks in Texas have access to sexual and reproductive health care and abortion. The DOJ is suing Texas to reverse this heinous abortion policy. But I want to be very clear, this is bigger than Texas. We know that on December 1st, the Supreme Court is going to take up another unnecessary abortion challenge out of the state of Mississippi, which bans abortion at 15 15 weeks. While for many people, this may come as, come out of nowhere, come out of the blue, we have long known that politicians, especially on the state level, are gunning for abortion across the country. In 2021, we've seen some of the most heinous and extensive abortion restrictions that we've ever seen. More than 200 abortion restrictions were proposed on state levels, all with one goal in mind: reversing the protections of Roe v. Wade.
The law not only targets the person that is pregnant, but those who willingly choose to help. Can you just expand on that a little bit and what that really means?
Absolutely. And this is the most heinous and egregious part of SB8, the law known as SB8 in Texas. It incentivizes vigilantes to take action against people who support family, friends who need access to abortion. So, for example, I'm here in the Bronx. If I cash app a cousin or a friend in Texas so that they can receive abortion care or pay for their taxi, after 6 weeks, someone in that state or any state can turn around and sue me or whomever helped that friend access abortion care. It really puts a bounty on the heads of individuals who support people they love. And the truth of the matter is, 1 in 4 women of reproductive age have or will receive or have an abortion, which means we all love someone who has had an abortion. And this law is designed to dismantle the support network and system for those looking to access care.
So you referenced that it's, similar to enticing bounty hunting, which is similar to what New York Attorney General Letitia James has said as well. Do you think it's easy for people to see this as an attack on women and people who can get pregnant?
It's not easy to see it. It absolutely is an attack on a person's bodily autonomy and their right to make informed decisions about their body, their family, and their futures. Again, this is not something that came out of the dead of night. We've been seeing legislatures across this country enact really heinous abortion bans and restrictions. Again, all with the goal of trying to overturn Roe v. Wade, which is 50 years of precedent, which is 50 years of cultural norms. And on December 1st, the Supreme Court will take up a case that ultimately can do that. With Trump's, former President Trump has 3 hyper-conservative justices on the bench, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, who are vocal opponents of abortion. They are going to look to overturn Roe v. Wade, which protects individuals seeking to terminate a pregnancy and receive vital abortion care. Here in New York, we know that abortion is essential. That's why during the pandemic, our health centers were open and providing care in the Bronx and throughout the state.
And will this provide unique challenges for those who, live in lower income areas or just women of color in general?
Anytime there's a barrier to accessing healthcare, it greatly impacts those who struggle to afford it in the first place. This will absolutely hurt families with low incomes, communities of color who have historically and still face inequitable access to healthcare, immigrants who, we're talking about Texas, we know for a fact that there are people from Mexico who migrated from Mexico to Texas just to receive abortion care. Recently, Mexico decriminalized abortion across the country, but access to that care is still a struggle. And that's what we're seeing in Texas. Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land. Abortion is still safe and legal in all 50 states. But what Texas politicians did was make abortion virtually inaccessible to folks. This is an onslaught, an attack on our reproductive rights, not only for the folks in Texas, but people across the country who need access to care. Because the truth of the matter is, they're really, they're politicians who are really looking to turn back the clock on reproductive rights in this country.
And what are some ways we can truly decriminalize abortion?
Well, in New York, in 2019, we passed a Reproductive Health Act. And what the Reproductive Health Act did was codify the protections of Roe v. Wade in state law. That means that abortion will always be safe and legal in our state. It takes healthcare providers like Planned Parenthood and our partners across the state to ensure that it's always accessible. That's why we're always looking at innovative ways to connect folks to care within our healthcare networks. On the federal level, passing the Women's Protection Act would hopefully do the same thing. Right now, that bill is up for consideration, and we hope that our champions in Washington take swift action to ensure that Roe v. Wade remains the law of the land.
And can you tell us, what Planned Parenthood just across the board is doing to address this matter and to make sure that, people that utilize this organization are still being protected?
Yeah, mobilizing our supporters, raising our voices, telling politicians and the Supreme Court bans off our bodies. Right now, folks can take action by signing a petition to defend abortion access. If you have your phone in your hand, I implore you to text SB 8 to 22422. Or visit our website, wearepp.org/SB8, and sign a petition to tell politicians everywhere that we demand access to sexual and reproductive health care, including safe, legal abortion.
And then quickly, can you just explain the importance of, ride services like Lyft? They, release an email saying they support their drivers who may be unaware or, who have anything to do with this. What is the importance of large organizations, having, supporting their riders?
It's vital. Look, Lyft, Uber, those are targets under SB 8 as well. If a pregnant person's neighbor sees them getting into a Lyft in Texas, and for some reason they know exactly that they're going to receive abortion care, they can then sue a Lyft driver. That's how ridiculous and maddening this law is. So it's crucial that companies really speak up. We know that abortion is healthcare. Abortion is healthcare in this country and everywhere. So it's vital that these companies continue to speak up, support their employees, and specifically support people who need access to care.
We'll be right back with more Open BXRX Tuesday Best Of.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Trans.
Sculptures towered Union Square after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor sparked a nationwide discussion on racial injustice and police brutality. It was such a pleasure to have the actual artist of the sculpture speak to us about the inspiration for the artwork and the impact we hope it had on anyone who saw them. Watch this interview where artist of the sculpture, Chris Carnabucci, discusses the vandalism toward George Floyd's sculpture and whether the statues serve a greater purpose. In 2020, the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor sparked a nationwide discussion on racial injustice and police brutality. Shortly after, statues in honor of Floyd, Taylor, and late U.S. Representative and civil rights activist John Lewis towered Union Square in New York City. Artist of the statues, Chris Carnabucci, joins us today for a discussion on his work. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So your sculptures recently made headlines, but I kind of want to go back a little. Can you just tell us what was going through your mind the moment you decided to create these sculptures?
Well, it all started after George Floyd was killed and the world sort of erupted. And I remember sitting with my wife and she turned to me and said, "You need to do a sculpture of George Floyd." And I totally got it. It was a moment in time that I wanted to sort of capture, a significant moment in our history. And I thought the best way to do it was what I do. I'm a sculptor, so I went ahead and I did a small piece of George Floyd. It was 20 inches tall. And then one thing led to the next, and that a picture of the sculpture was seen by Terrence Floyd, George's brother. And so he saw this because he was working on his We Are Floyd Foundation. So he saw this sculpture and thought it would be great to sort of sync the art with his foundation in an effort to bring awareness to what he was doing. And that's what it was from the start, and that's what it is today. It's the exhibit is an effort to, on a higher level, raise awareness, of course, of injustice, but specifically to raise awareness and funds for the We Are Floyd Foundation, Justice for Breonna, and the John and Lillian Lewis Foundation. So that's how it all got started, from an idea that my wife had about doing a sculpture of George Floyd. And then as we were in conversation with Terrence, I thought that it could be part of a larger exhibit. So it made sense to include Breonna Taylor. Obviously, there's some commonality between Breonna and George Floyd. But then I thought it would make perfect sense to have one of the early civil rights activists and a man that I've been, that I had tremendous amount of respect for, John Lewis. And so that's how the three came together to form the See Injustice exhibit.
Now, as you mentioned, this happened after the horrific events in 2020. Have you ever been inspired before to kind of make art based on events that happen, whether it's regarding racial injustice or any type of injustice?
This was the first exhibit that was done explicitly to bring awareness to a particular issue. Previous to this, I had done one called Mariposita, which is a 20-foot sculpture of a female figure emerging from an egg. And that, to a lot of people, represented the strength and beauty of the feminine spirit. Although it wasn't my intention originally to sort of push that narrative, it just happened to be that way. In this case, it was fully intentional, right at the top, to present an exhibit that brings about this awareness of injustice, and more specifically to help in that small way that I can as a sculptor, the foundations that we're now affiliated with.
So these sculptures are massive, and I feel like there's no way you can't look at them. Can you tell us about the creative process behind bringing this artwork to life?
Sure thing. I'll try not to bore your audience, but it starts with a 3D model. In this case, models that were developed by a father-son team, Daniel and Rodman Edwards. So I take that model, which is a virtual model, and I bring it through a couple of different programs, one of which allows me to slice or sort of deconstruct that model into layers. And then there's a number of different things that I need to do to modify each one of those layers. And by the way, each sculpture has about 200 different layers. Once everything has been programmed, then I bring it to a CNC machine, which is this large robotic sort of computer controlled browder. And then I can do actual fabrication, actual production, where I'm cutting, numbering them, sanding them, and then I get to a point where I can start stacking them, and they slowly but surely sort of create what ends up being a sculptural interpretation of that original 3D model. And so for this particular exhibit, I went one step further, and I did a metallic bronze finish on the wood, because otherwise it's a wood sculpture that's vulnerable because of the nature of the material. And so I wanted to add that layer of protection, but in a way that gave it another, dimension, right? And that edginess of metallic bronze. So that's my process.
Now, can you explain what emotion you wanted to invoke in people who walk past these sculptures?
That's a good question, and I've asked myself that a number of times. At the end of the day, I don't have a particular emotion in mind that I want to evoke, I want to evoke from people. As a sculptor, what my job is to create an environment, a venue, a physical pocket where people can gather and share each other's opinions and engage in civil discourse, to understand possibly each other's perspectives. And that's what my job is. And in having an exhibit there in Union Square, I mean, it's a perfect venue because obviously people will gather and will not only have that internal, that sort of introspection of how they personally feel about the sculpture, but also be able to communicate those feelings with others. And I think that's sort of key, because if we can come to some sort of understanding of each other's perspectives, maybe you can have decent dialogue and, hear each other out.
So can you also speak a little bit more about Union Square? Because I understand there's a little bit of significance for why it's there.
A little bit, sure. First of all, it's an iconic place, right? And there've been protests and rallies for hundreds of years. So we thought that, and we were so lucky that Union Square and all the other organizations that needed to sort of approve of this exhibit allowed us to exhibit there, because it is that iconic space. It's got a storied history of, like I said before, rallies and protests against, injustice and anything else. So we do feel quite privileged to be there.
And according to the New York Times, you actually sought out the approval of the families first. Can you explain why that was important for you?
Absolutely. We couldn't have done this without the support of the families. And the reason is because we wanted to lend the art to what they were doing. So it wasn't ever about what I wanted. It's about what I could do to help out the We Are Floyd Foundation and the other foundations that I mentioned before. So in that case, we needed to get the support and, if you will, approval from the families, which we did, in order to proceed.
Now, how did you feel when you heard the news someone actually vandalized the statue?
I was really pissed, to be honest with you, but I wasn't shocked. It happened before. You know, like I said, it wasn't shocking. Just to me, there are much better ways to express one's opinion than to damage an object. I mean, it's an object that has meaning beyond its, its physical condition, but it's an object, and by damaging the object, you're not damaging the meaning or the message. And in this case, you're amplifying it because, we're talking about it now. You're sort of amplifying the message. And I wasn't happy that, this act gave me an opportunity to talk with you or with anyone else about it. But as it turns out, that's what happened. And it just, like I said, very high risk, very low reward act on the part of the vandal. But it's a perfect illustration of why, we need to keep talking and there's a long way to go.
And I want to know quickly, why do you think they only targeted George Floyd's statue?
I think that a lot of people look at the sculpture and say, why are we, honoring the life of a man? And then they'll go on and list the various things that they heard about this man's life and that they disapprove with. And to that, I would say, don't think of it as sort of hero worshiping or, honoring a man's life that a man who I knew nothing about. But think of it as the death of this man caused a worldwide movement that resonates today. And where were you in the summer of 2020? And try to just understand that it is a memorial to the killing of George Floyd, and such that we should never forget what happened. And that's why we have a sculpture of George Floyd. And apparently there are some people that for whatever reason can't get around that.
So can you just tell us, where can people get in touch with you when it comes to these statues?
Well, each one of the sculptures has a QR code, right? Like literally on the sculpture itself. And from there, there's information about me. There's information about Confront Art, which is the curator of the exhibit. But more importantly, there's information about the various foundations with whom we are affiliated through this exhibition. And it's through there where you can get read up on what those foundations stand for, what their needs are, and maybe, ways to participate. But look, literally everything is on the statue. If you aren't able to go there, then you can go to the confrontart.com website, which will have all of the information that you need.
We'll be right back with more Open BXRX Tuesday Best Of. Nearly 2 years after the death of Ahmaud Arbery, the three white men who chased and killed the 25-year-old were all found guilty of murder charges. Policy director at ACLU of Georgia and an expert on racial profiling, bias, and the criminal justice system joined us for discussion on this tragedy. Being able to speak with an expert from Georgia on this was very impactful to this interview. Ahmaud's story deeply affected many across the country, so to speak to someone from the state where it all happened added a layer to our understanding of the situation. In February 2020, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was murdered while jogging in a Georgia neighborhood. Nearly 2 years later, the three white men who chased and killed Arbery were all found guilty of murder charges. Joining us to discuss this case and the politics of race and anti-Blackness is Christopher Bruce, policy director at ACLU of Georgia, and an expert on racial profiling, bias, and the criminal justice system. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So, Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan Jr. were all found guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. In a few months, it will be nearly 2 years since Ahmaud was killed. Why do you think this took so long?
Well, let's be real about the subject. The system works the way that it was designed to work, and that is to be biased against Black people. So when they actually looked into the investigation, we saw that the police did not do their job. They saw a dead Black man on the ground, and they saw three white individuals who claimed self-defense. And you had a district attorney who literally obstructed justice, Jackie Johnson, and told them not to arrest the Bryants. And they slept in their beds for 74 days. So the reason why this didn't happen is because the system works like that. And when people are not watching, things like this happen often in America.
So it initially took 10 weeks for law enforcement to make the first arrest. At the time, Georgia had a state citizen arrest law, which allowed residents to take law enforcement into their own hands if they witnessed a crime and the police weren't around. What do you make of this? And could this be an example of state-sanctioned violence?
Oh, absolutely. And if we know anything about the history of the United States, the police departments weren't made originally. It was slave patrols used to harass people under the same guise of citizens arrest. The history of citizens arrest, even in the state of Georgia, harken back to civil rights days. So using this type of defense today goes along with what's been done before of terrorizing Black communities. What we need to do and what Georgia has done has been the first state to repeal citizens arrest. But let me tell you, it's just one piece of a biased justice system against Black people.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit. Black people face a unique experience in the US and often deal with the effects of implicit bias. Can you explain what implicit bias is? And do you think that's what we actually saw with the murder of Ahmaud?
It's different for different people, but basically implicit bias is when you initially, through the systematic assimilation of our country, are looking towards people in a certain way. It affects us in so many ways, including who is beautiful, what type of foods to eat, what makes you feel good or what's not, what's definitely accepted in society. And there's an implicit bias towards Black men. If I did not have on this jacket and this tie, and I just had on a hoodie and something else, I would still be an attorney. I still graduated from law school, but you wouldn't see that. You would see me as a thug or a hoodlum because that's what the media and that's what the system has put forth. What we're doing right now is making sure that we have to break down these barriers between each other so that we can all be accepted and treated as Americans instead of being hunted down like we're terrorists or somebody who's actually harming the community.
Now, I really like to know, is it still implicit bias if these subconscious thoughts are followed up with harmful and racist actions?
It is. Implicit bias is just the beginning towards an end. So if you already have these thoughts of this person is less than a human, let me treat them as less than a human. That is a problem within our society altogether. So really the thoughts and the paradigms that we have, not as a society as a whole in the nation, and especially in the area of Brunswick, where you have some of the highest disparities of wealth between white people and Black people in this nation, not just Georgia, in the nation. You see it playing out in these areas of saying, well, we're still going to believe in white supremacy. And I believe that's what you saw in this trial.
So, when the news reported the guilty verdict, many people were relieved. However, I think that relief speaks to something larger. Many feared that these three men would actually get away with this. Are we right to have this fear? And what has history shown us in regards to white aggressors and Black victims?
Ahmaud Arbery was murdered on February 23rd of 2020. Trayvon Martin was murdered on February 26th of 2013. The reason why I know that is because I was just interning in law school and was sent to Sanford, Florida to really look into the Trayvon Martin murder itself. So within those 7 years, we have not changed. And in some ways, we've become worse of seeing the embodiment of Black men lying on the street or literally murdered by the hands of someone else. These type of problems happen all across the country. The thing about it is everyone does not have a video. So we haven't seen justice really happen at this point.
And I want to look a little bit further into this case. The defense team for the murderers of the trial argued self defense, as we both know, and attacked Ahmaud's character while doing so. The defendants also dehumanized Arbery, referencing his long, dirty toenails. Can you address what America was actually seeing in that moment of the trial?
We're looking at something that the district attorney actually did a very good job in prosecuting the case. The district attorney did not mention race not one time throughout the entire trial, except in their closing arguments, while the defense continuously brought up race. And the prosecutor did a great job of this because they knew that there was implicit bias within this county or culture. The reason why the district attorney stayed away from it is because of the implicit bias of the area, of saying this didn't happen really more towards this is a human being. Let's forget about being Black or white. Let's start talking about what is humane and what is not. And it doesn't matter who was jogging down the street. It matters on who this person was. And Ahmaud Arbery was a young Black man who was not bothering anyone. And the reference to the dirty toenails was by the defense to really bring up the racial issue within it of trying to dehumanize him. So the back and forth play, you see it playing out. Luckily, the prosecution won.
So there's no doubt the defense lawyer was hoping to connect to the jury. The jury was nearly all white with one Black juror, and this seems to happen often in these types of trials. We just saw it with the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Do you think this is intentional?
Oh, absolutely. Again, the system is set up to benefit or not benefit Black people altogether. So it's to keep the status quo. And if you are going to keep the status quo, you have to keep up the systems within themselves. So you don't really need to change anything. We need to look further into our communities about how jurors are selected. Signing up for voting roles and everything else are ways that certain counties look into it. So if you have not looked into it, if you've never been called for actually jury duty, you need to be looking at your county and saying, why not? Like, I should step up and speak towards the standards of justice in my community.
And I guess just so we're clear, do you feel the race of the jurors matter?
Oh, absolutely. Race is always going to be an issue in America, and the race of the jurors, especially in this county, is always going to be an issue. I think, and you see this within the charges for the jury. Travis McMichael got the most amount of charges of guilty verdicts, then Greg McMichael, and then Mr. Bryant. So the jury was very deliberate when it came to the culpability of the case, of saying there are some people who pulled the trigger who would definitely get more time, while others who did not, but definitely co-conspirated in crime, are still guilty, but do not have the same level of culpability. So the jury was very deliberate within this.
So, as I mentioned previously, many were relieved to see the family of Arbery get justice. However, according to CNN, attorney for William Roddy Bryan Jr. says he plans to appeal. I think this is super important. Can you just tell us what that actually means?
Well, an appeal is basically trying to gauge the judge's decision or the jury's decision altogether about if this person's guilty or not. And they'll be looking at certain objections in the case of saying, why are we appealing this? One of the objections is, why do you have Black pastors in the courtroom? Did this bias the jury altogether? And when it comes down to it, you have a constitutional right to look into trials and for fairness of a trial. So it was disgusting for them to even bring that up. For the appeal, he may be doing this because he's getting paid by other white supremacist groups who defended racists before. So he may have his own bias towards it, of really looking into money. Let's not forget, too, come February of 2022, all of them will be on hate crimes charges by the federal government as well. So that's even more time. And that will be a trial basically focused on race.
Now, prior to Ahmaud's death, Georgia was one of 4 states without a hate crimes law. I was really shocked to hear that. Can you tell me your thoughts on that?
It's Georgia, okay? And I hate to say it like that. I've lived here for so many years. I was there with the governor when he signed the hate crimes bill, especially including other issues such as LGBTQ. There's a lot of hate in this country in places. So we were grouped in with Alabama, Mississippi. The only time you want to be grouped in with that group is in football. You do not want to be grouped when it comes into civil rights or anything else. Georgia still lacks a civil rights omnibus bill to protect our rights as well. So this is just one of the many things, again, to look into the system of injustice within the state and within the nation.
And I also just want to add that they kind of got rid of the citizen's arrest law due to this death. So although it's taken some time, at least something came out of this. I want to know, looking back at this case, if it weren't for activists and social media, do you think Arbery's family would have seen justice at all for their son?
Not at all. What it really comes down to, again, he was murdered on February 23rd of 2020. And if it takes 74 days to arrest a murderer, then we have been woefully silent. We've really not even given the credence of the system that it should be. If it was not for that video being released and the absolute outcry, you may have gotten another situation where white supremacists were relieved of their duty and probably praised within their community of killing a Black man. That's happened before in the 1920s, and now we're in 2020.
Christopher, thank you so much for joining me. Lastly, could you just tell everyone where they can stay up to date with you and just learn more and educate themselves on racial injustice in America?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Attorney C. Bruce. And also make sure that you do follow and continue this fight. Justice is not done yet. Justice is when this never happens again to another family or anything else. So yes, putting someone who harmed someone in prison is one thing. Making sure that this does not happen again is another. Let's seek for the latter.
We'll be right back with more Open BXRX Tuesday Best Of.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
For this next clip, I had a conversation with the Bronx's first Black and female borough president-elect, Vanessa Gibson. This was a very special interview for me because I was speaking to a woman who changed history for women and girls due to her passion she has for bettering the Bronx. Stay tuned for an interview where Gibson reflects on whether or not 2021 was the year we saw the landscape of politics change for women. I'm speaking to a woman who broke glass ceilings and possibly concrete ceilings, becoming the first woman and the first Black Bronx Borough president. Joining me to discuss this historic victory is none other than Bronx Borough President-elect Vanessa Gibson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today. Happy holidays to everyone.
So, as I mentioned, you made history with this win. How does it feel to enter the lineup of women who changed the world of politics?
It feels great. I am overwhelmed with just emotion, knowing that so many people have paved the way for me to be here where I am today. Making history as the first ever African-American and female elected Bronx Borough president is the greatest honor of my life. And as I step into this new role, there are so many people that I am bringing with me to make sure that we elevate the voices of young girls and young women across the borough of the Bronx, that we realize that women are doing amazing things. We're shattering glass ceilings. We're stepping into roles never designed for us, and we are going to make a difference. So I'm really grateful to all the voters of the Bronx. Whether you supported us or not, I am going to be the Bronx Borough president to serve you and your families to the very best of my ability, and I look forward to this next chapter of public service.
Now, I'm sure this wasn't an easy accomplishment, being both African American and a woman. What challenges do we face in this career field?
Generally, women of color face challenges running for any office. It's hard to raise money. You're usually competing with men in terms of candidates running for office. It's really tough for women of color to break down those barriers when it comes to not just solidifying our place in history, but really overcoming a lot of the challenges. Many of us are wives, we're mothers, we are breadwinners in our families. We're caring for our loved ones, our children, adopted children, everybody's children. And, you know, it's really tough to multitask and make sure that at the end of the day, you're taking care of yourself. Self-care is number one, but you're also making sure that you are running for office for the right reasons. So many women have paved the way, and I have so many big sisters that I look up to, like the Attorney General, Letitia James, our former council speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, the first Latina elected speaker in the history of the city council, and our Bronx District Attorney, Darcel Clark, another history maker. So many women that have shattered the glass ceiling that are stepping up into these leadership roles and recognizing that women can do any and everything that we put our minds and our hearts to.
Now, I think it's amazing that you made history the same year America saw its first Black and Asian American female VP in Kamala Harris. I know that you were a huge supporter of Harris, so did you reflect on this at all, and did it make your win feel even more special?
I did. When Kamala Harris took her oath of office that wonderful day, I cried because I know that for her ascension to vice president, it means so much for Black and Latino women across the country. It means that we can dare to dream, we can hope to succeed, and we can really break down those obstacles that have been so many barriers for us in office, running for office, being educators, administrators, teachers, doctors, whatever it is that we want to be. Many of us are first in our family to go to college, as I am. And so we're making history every single day. The single mothers out there that are raising their children, working, going to school, the educator, the social worker, the guidance counselor, the school crossing guard, the police officer, the firefighter, so many barriers that we are always breaking down. And a lot of us do it because we know that we've been called to serve. We don't do it for the accolades, for the awards and the trophies and the plaques, but we do it because we have been called to serve for such a time as this.
Now, as we know, Harris became the first of her kind to sit in the Oval Office as VP, and you became the first to lead the Bronx as VP. Without a doubt, it's a huge accomplishment, but what are your thoughts on the fact that in 2021, we're still seeing firsts, for women of color, for women, just in positions of power?
It means that society is finally changing with the times. Society in this country is realizing that women can do anything that we put our minds to, that we can look at women as the vice president, as the next Bronx Bar president, as the attorney general. We can see women in positions of power and influence that we've never seen before. It means that the world is recognizing that women are a critical part of the political process of our democracy. When you think about this country, when you think about places like Pennsylvania and Georgia, it was black women that really allowed these elections to happen, that allow Kamala Harris to ascend to vice president. So for me, it means that times are changing. We're embracing a new season and a new chapter. And it doesn't mean that things will not go well. It means that it's a chance to be creative and innovative. It's a chance to give women the opportunity to show us who they are, show us their skill set, to prove to the world that women can do anything, and really making sure that we lead with our hearts and our minds and with conviction and commitment and consistency and integrity. And we do all the things that our male counterparts have been doing for generations. And now it's the season of women, the year of the female, and now we're stepping up in these major roles.
Now, in an article for the Bronx Times, you share that women of color are winning seats that weren't meant for us. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. When you think about the incoming city council members that are joining the new body in 2022, 31 are women, and a majority of them are women of color, African-American women, Latina women, and Southeast Asian women. And women of color are just making up the entire body of the city council. And it's exciting. There is a new momentum happening across the city, and women are stepping out of their shells. We are defying the odds. We may not be the best and most powerful fundraisers, but we're getting things done, and we're doing it in such a way where we are winning these offices and we're stepping into these new roles. Just alone in the Bronx, in the city council's Bronx delegation, we have new women coming in. My successor, Althea Stevens, in District 13, Marjorie Velasquez, who is the first ever Latina elected council member in the East Bronx. We have Amanda Farias in the Park Chester Castle Hill area of District 18. We have Parina Sanchez in the West Bronx, District 14. And we have Diana Ayala, who is a candidate running for Speaker of the City Council, representing El Barrio in the South Bronx. So I'm excited to work with these women as well as all of my colleagues in the state legislature. And I really think as we move forward, we have to realize that we have to provide gender equality and making sure that women are at the table making these decisions just as we expect anyone else to be. We have to make sure that women are at the forefront of these conversations and the decision-making power.
And I also want to just like kind of put emphasis on like, the women of color part. It's why in my intro I said, possibly concrete ceilings, because we do have this added layer of, dealing with our identity as people of color and then dealing with identity as, women. So I think it's really important. I'm so happy that you were able to elaborate on like, why that was just so important. Prior to this win, you've been a strong advocate for women of all walks of life. And we've seen this through your work that you've done as a council member and your work on the New York City Council Women's Caucus. Can you tell us about that experience?
Absolutely. Well, it's been an honor to be in the council for 8 years. I thank the residents and voters of District 16 for their love and support and voter confidence. And for the last 2 years, I've had the honor of joining my co-chair, Farrah Lewis of Brooklyn, in serving as co-chair of the Women's Caucus. We started with 12 members and now we're up to 15. And although we are at 15, we represent women's issues. We represent issues around gender parity and pay equity and maternal mortality and maternal morbidity and infant mortality, and so many issues that predominantly plague women and women of color, making sure that we address reproductive health care and healthcare justice so that women of color are not more likely to die during childbirth because of disparate health care, that women are paid the same amount as their male counterparts for equal work. We have equal pay day for Latinas, for Asian Americans, and for Black women, because all of the women are not paid the same amount as their male counterparts for doing the same work with the same occupation and the same level of skill. And so as the co-chair of the Women's Caucus, we've championed these issues. We've joined our colleagues in addressing issues within the NYPD Special Victims Unit. focusing on victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence and elder abuse and intimate partner violence. We've added more money for domestic violence services and gender-based programs. We've supported LGBTQIA+ communities and transgender women. We are working with the Department of Corrections because we know that female corrections officers are under attack on Rikers Island and in our city jails. So we have been advocates standing up for women, for equality, because we know that when you stand up for women, you're standing up for children as well. Every issue is a woman's issue. Every issue affects women in a different way. And as women in the body of the city council, we not only want to be the advocates, but we want to be the champions for women so that our young girls can grow up in a society that is free of racism and discrimination and misogyny and just so many efforts that undermine women. We want our young girls to grow up in a community that loves them, that supports them, that embraces them, that empowers them, where they don't have to deal with the challenges that many of us have faced today.
Now, I think it's important to note while your dedication to the Bronx deserve this outcome, and I fully believe that, it could not be done without support. The Bronx was ready to see change and voted in our first Black and female BP. Can you tell us your thoughts on that? And in what ways do you hope to continue to see our borough change?
I definitely want to lead the borough as the next Bronx Borough President with commitment, consistency, and integrity and honesty. I want to build collaborations and coalitions across the borough of the Bronx. I want to have public and private partnerships, and I want to think outside of the box. We have to look at a lot of the issues like homelessness, poverty, gun violence, and so many issues around domestic violence and gender-based violence. We have to look at it from a holistic perspective. We cannot think that government is going to save us, but we have to be the ones to save ourselves. We have to believe that we deserve better as Bronx residents and families, whether you are a tenant, a homeowner, a shareholder, whether you live in a co-op, Mitchell-Lama, public housing, you deserve to live in a borough that is safe, that is free of violence, good schools, clean parks, and clean streets. No matter where you live, no matter where you work, you deserve that as a Bronx resident. And it is my belief and my priority to work every day with my team and I to get the job done and to work with our mayor-elect, Eric Adams, and his team, and all of my colleagues and all of our stakeholders. We're going to form public-private partnerships and working groups with labor unions and trades. We're going to build economic wealth and power and invest in our children and our families, because when you invest in our children, you invest in their future. And our children are the future. They are the pathway to success, and we are going to make a difference in the borough of the Bronx.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about this. I really appreciate it. Can you just let everybody know where they can keep up with you?
Sure. So my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is all Vanessa L. Gibson. My Instagram is Miss Vanessa 77. I believe my Twitter is Vanessa L. Gibson, but my campaign website is GibsonBP2021.com. My transition website is GibsonBPTransition.com, where we are receiving resumes for interested applicants that want to join the office of the Bronx Borough President. But you can look me up. We are anxious about getting the job done and starting to work on day one as we transition out of the city council. Thank you to the residents of District 16. May God bless you all. Thank you for your support. Thank you for this incredible journey. And I wish you and your families a very happy holiday season. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and best wishes for a wonderful and prosperous 2022. God bless you all.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning to the Best of Open BXRX Tuesday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you all a happy holiday and a very happy new year. See you next year.